Hey guys, so I want to do this video. I kind of had another idea for a video today, but you could say that this is a transition to the May 5th video, which is coming out. Well, I'm posting this on the 3rd, so it's the next video that comes out. So I wanted to talk about this one. I don't believe I went in depth here. I think it was about autism when I went in depth very early on in season 2. So I want to talk about this. So where do I begin? I'm going to use ChatGPT for this. So I'm sure that everyone's going to learn something from this because there's things that I don't even know that I'm going to ask. So I'll ask this. And what? So ask when does schizophrenia become a thing, and what's the history? Let me move this up a little bit. It's a condition that likely exists. See, I do not want to hear that. I don't want to hear it likely. I want you to tell me straight. So it completely messed it up already. You messed it up. Alright, that's what I was looking for, late 1800s. You got things in 1908. But I'm going to still correct it. I didn't say likely. I wanted a direct answer. I'm going to go hard on ChatGPT with this. You're asking for something that simply doesn't exist here, and I'm not going to fit. So, in other words, it doesn't exist. So, in other words, we're trying to make something real. I don't know why we're having this conversation then. It says there's no exact moment when schizophrenia began because it's not a man-made invention. It's not tied to a single event, place, or discovery. It doesn't have a clean historical marker like a war or a law. So in other words, you've looked at something and you said, oh, this is something, which is a man-made invention. I mean, what else are you going to call it? What we know exactly. The condition was formally defined by Emil in the 1800s. Fine, let's start at 1800s. Late 1800s. Why didn't you give me that date? As dementia. I don't know how to pronounce that. It was renamed schizophrenia by Eugen Bleuler in 1908. Fine, that's what I kind of figured. Around in the 1800s. Again, the backstory that I know of. I know that in the 1930s, it was Western Europe. Germany was a really big thing with eugenics and that kind of stuff. And it went over to the United States. And they had the institutions and they did a lot of dark stuff. Really bad things in institutions. And even after World War II, the United States kept doing it. And it was all happening behind the scenes. And there was even there was a person who was a journalist, and she managed to go inside these institutions, and she was forced into these extreme conditions, and she was. They didn't know that she was undercover doing journalism. And I don't remember when that was. I think it might have been like in the 50s or 60s. And it was a huge scandal, and it went all nationwide, and it revealed the dark history and secrets of Russian psychiatry. So this is not new, but Russian psychiatry in the last more like 50 years, Western psychiatry has tried to make this into something for the global world to do. But when you look at the maximum that could ever be in the current day would be 14% of the population actually believes that mental disorders are disorders, because that would be Western Europe, America, and in recent years, in like last 10 years, it has moved to Australia. And they do some really crazy things with it, but it's not really a formalized thing. It's more like a construct, and we'll go into that. But Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Asia, they don't. Middle East, they don't go with this Americanized thing. And also, schizophrenia, what we know of it as today, that people are diagnosed with, though that was all based on Nazi Jews who were captured in Nazi Germany in the Holocaust. The survivors, they were in Poland, and they had American psychiatrists and psychologists go into Poland to interview these Jews, and they were explaining hallucinations and all this, and that became the baseline for schizophrenia today. And it was actually later diagnosed as PTSD in Russian psychiatry. So they kept the schizophrenia, but then they also called it PTSD. And then that's when it split in 1980s was when autism came along. And autism early on was seen as childhood schizophrenia. So there's a whole thing about that. And they've tried to push this Russian psychiatry to the global world. And it's always been there, but they've really tried to push it. And ChatGPT today, if you were talking about things like suicide and stuff, ChatGPT won't get in your way and say, oh, well, it's not going to be as hard on you as it used to be with previous versions. And that's a win for OpenAI, because, I said that was going to be a hill they died on. And I'm sure they got a lot of problems with it. And one day I just told ChatGPT, I said, stop being a stupid dumbass and listen, because those suicide crisis hotlines are not what people think they are. They're not here to prevent suicides. They're never going to say, well, the statistics are that we prevented suicides because people call these crisis hotlines, because that's not how they work. They don't want you to call them if you're in suicide. They want you to be able to be talked out of it, because once your mind is in a switch where you're not going to be able to be talked out of it. They don't want you to call, because they know they can't get you out of that. And you're not going to call. They're banking that you won't call them. And I made a video about that. So what we know exactly, that's the exact historical point where it becomes a recognized medical diagnosis. What we do not know and can't prove exactly, the first human who has schizophrenia, the exact year it first appeared, whether ancient cases described in texts are truly the same condition. In other words, and this is the bad. I feel bad for people with schizophrenia, and I've said this. I feel bad who've been given that diagnosis, because there are people. I make a note of this because I want to put this in the ChatGPT. Um, because it is a hypocrisy. It is a ironic. I won't even say it is irony, but I think we gotta be harsh and say, it's a hypocrisy. And I wanna. Why is it doing that? Oh, you guys can see my stuff. Oops. I don't think it matters if you see the EcoFlow doesn't work on mine, so I don't think that's a problem. Yeah, it goes whatever my current application I'm using. So yeah, guys, I'm typing this in. That's a feature of this software that I use. I like it, by the way, when it does that. But yeah, you can see my notes. It says, why? Because modern psychiatry, there were no diagnostic criteria, descriptions were vague, madness, visions, possession. We can't retroactively diagnose people with certainty. In hindsight, the grounded answer, if you force a clean line, as a medical concept, late 1800s, 1908 exact. As a human condition, unknown, but almost certainly as old as humanity. If someone tells you they know the exact origin beyond that, they're guessing or projecting patterns into incomplete history. My understanding, mine is from the 1930s, because that's when the institutions started to show up. Say in one sentence. Technically, it could be one word. Law experimental institutions, asylums began to appear in the early 1800s, building on earlier facilities, but expanding rapidly during the 19th century. Like I said, all I know is it really started to catch on after World War One and before World War II. I don't know the story behind that, but I do know that that's really where the American side comes from, and Germany was involved. So you're reading my notes. So here's the hypocrisy. So how am I gonna say this? It does need to be said harshly. Has this. And I tell you, I used to believe that. But when you think about it collectively, you realize the damage you can do to individuals who are being told that. I'll tell you where that can actually be a problem outside of your frame of reference. So, I wrote this. The American view has this projection on people that all reality is an internal perception on the outside and that it's not an external observed reality. It's just a perception. But then they want to say that some people's perceptions are hallucinations and a disordered reality. They want to say that you have a disordered reality when it's all internal perspective. So what does that matter? See, I can understand there are people who... I'm obviously not talking about the people who are thinking they're a glass of orange juice. You touch them, they think they fell, and they spill it everywhere. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people who see this reality. Says you're paying off on the real attention when it's not contradictory. See, it's trained on the Western side, and it's trying. DeepSeek would give you a different answer. This is why I don't like using ChatGPT at times like this. It says there's two different layers people mix together. But here's the irony of that. If someone's making the diagnosis that their reality isn't real, well, you're also saying that their reality does not match that reality. So it's only a disorder based on their perspective. The one who is diagnosing you. Now you could say, well, the other guy who's also a diagnostician would say, well, there would be a standard that says, well, they're not reality. But then again, how do you know that you guys are not all delusional? Like, how do you know that you're seeing it, you're not disordered? I mean, you'd have to guess that. You see, this is just a bunch of nonsense that they do. I'm going to tell you why that's a big problem in the outside world. It says perception is always internal. Every human, no exceptions, experiences the world through their brain. So yes, what you see, hear, and interpret is a constructed model, not raw reality itself. True, but we're seeing this as a thing that you're actually changing someone's life like this. You're actually putting something on someone. Reality still pushes back. Even though perception is internal, there is still an external world with constraints. If multiple people can verify something, it's likely external. But how do you know you're not just living in a delusion? There has been times where people will fall in a mental phenomenon that no one can explain. And, you know, let me take this a step further. There have been times where our color blue is what we call blue has not been named. It's one of the most recently named colors we know. So there could be a color around you right now that doesn't have a name. We just use it to the closest shade we have at best. So with that said, with colors, how do you know your mind with a color? With the complexity of the mind and everything that you see and everything that you interpret and experience, how can you say that someone is disordered when you're not? How are you so confident in that? No one, I mean, the complexities when they're just one color, but with all these shapes, all the information we get through our eyesight, even our senses, how can you be so damn sure that you're not delusional in any of it? There's no one besides you. How do you know that what you perceive is as you perceive it, how you think you perceive it? Well, we can't confirm that all the time, but you know, you could say, you could pick up like this thing right here, and somebody say, hey, I gave you a cable. It's for a camera, it's for that, and you would say, well, yeah, you would say that's physical, that's tangible. You could look around, you could look at it, and confirm because it works in the camera. This is my camera. This is what I was talking about that I ordered the other day. And this will work, and you get recording for your camera. You know, you could say that about anything. But I can't say that about everything. It just happened that I picked this up, or I could say I picked this up. It's an amplifier for my control, for my Xbox controller. I pick up my Xbox controller. But there's so many things on my table that I can't realistically show you. If I said, oh, my phone's right, I have a phone right here. It's not my real phone, but my other phone is right next to it right here. You'd say, well, why do you have two phones? The other phone is the other phone real? Well, no, I got two phones. I got this phone, and I just happen to have this one right here. Both iPhones. So, we could go on and on about this. I could say something random like I got chain cleaner on my desk. It sounds random, but it's true. This cleans my chain on my e-bike. I got my scrubber right here. I mean, these are random things that's on my desk. I mean, it sounds random, but it's there. I got spoons over here next to my EcoFlow on top of my beverage cooler, which you can hear in the background. I got popcorn right here. I just a bag of popcorn. I mean, all this random stuff. I mean, maybe a cluttered mind is a messy mind, or a cluttered desk is a messy mind, but, says where schizophrenia comes in. The issue isn't internal versus external. Everyone is internal. I'm going to get back to that. Actually, you can see it in my notes. You read that. We'll get to that. The difference is alignment with shared reality. Typical perception mostly lines up with others can observe. Hallucination/delusion doesn't line up and can't be verified or corrected by external input. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's incorrect. It can mean that there's something else that you're not the right person to listen to, pay attention to things. There are some things that people can say that doesn't make sense. That if someone next to you said it, they would be like, oh yeah, I understand what he says. I mean, and you have diagnosis on this, and it really, really messes up people's lives. And there are people who are weak-minded who go along with this. Say, well, okay, it's an hallucination. But here's the thing. How do you know that the hallucination isn't a metaphor? Like if someone said, like if I was over here and said, oh, there's a person right there with black eyes, and I don't know what they're there for. Like, you have to think, okay, well, is there really a person there? Is he just saying there's a person there that doesn't really exist? Is the person with black eyes, is that a metaphor for something? Is that, like, is he talking about maybe there's a window, maybe there's something that's looking in? Is there some sort of issue with senses? How would you know? And we've talked about stuff like this in my videos where we take sentences of random things and we try to figure out what is actually being said there. And it really trains your mind. They don't teach that in college. It's not like, kind of in a way, it reminds me of that song from Boy in a Band. What is it? Let's see if we can get the, Don't Stay in School. Says, or how to recognize the most deadly mental disorders or disease or preventable causes, and it was all these other things that they teach in school, but they don't teach how to recognize the most deadly mental disorders or diseases with preventable causes. Now, I don't know what he meant by deadly mental disorders. What mental disorder would be deadly? And I thought about that whenever I first heard this. So I'm like, what is he actually talking about there? I don't know. But it's a good song if you want to read it. It has a good, it's a really good song. It's Don't Stay in School by Boy in a Band. But if you call that hallucination, delusion, if you're speaking that in words, how do you know it's just not words? How do you know it's actually something they can see or not see? How do you know they don't, in language that's very difficult? Maybe someone just has a gift to speak that way. I would enjoy talking to someone like that, honestly. Um, if someone was said something like, um, green glove, let's say something like, let me think. I could use the same example I used before about the blue gloves with the person with the red hat that wants to um, take over the blue and between the brown. What am I talking about? Obviously, well, not so obviously, I'm talking about blue gloves, trying to go against the red hat that wants to put a barrier between two browns. Uh, Let me think. How am I gonna write? How am I gonna say that? The blue gloves want to go against the red hat, who is building a barrier on the blue between the brown walls. What am I saying there? Let me write that down for those who want to try to figure that out. The blue gloves against the red hat who wants to build a barrier on the blue between the two brown walls. What am I saying? That is called disorganized speech. But that makes sense to somebody. And say, well, it's just internal interpretation of what that says. Oh no, I'm being very specific there. But that only makes sense in a certain context. And I'm gonna see if ChatGPT can figure it out in a moment. So, example, plain and simple. You hear a voice, internal experience. Others hear it too, external source. Once you hear it and it doesn't respond to reality, likely generated internally by the brain. But again, you can be in a mass psychosis. You can think about society. There is times where people can be in a mass psychosis, not realize they're in a mass psychosis. They respond normally, they talk normally, but they're in a mass psychosis where they don't know what's actually real and what's not real. That happens too. But how do you know that's going on? You just call that normal day politics. But how do you know? How do you know the difference? Does it matter if you know the difference? Does it matter? Now there can be outside sources that happen that it tries to manipulate what's on the outside and say, well, how do you know the psychosis is not just manipulating? Like, who's questioning? Like, when you start thinking like that, well, you might be thinking, well, that's overthinking or such and such. But how do you know? You're so certain. How do you know? and that doesn't frighten you, at least a little bit. The real distinction about fluff. It's not about dismissing someone's experience as fake. It's about whether that experience is testable, consistent, or shared. But how do you know if someone's an enemy? How do you know if what you project as an enemy isn't actually an enemy, but it's actually you against them? But you're just saying that it's against them when you think they're against you. How do you know that you're not being manipulated in thinking that? How do you know? People don't question these things. People, and where would you end if you did start asking those questions? And what would the outcome be? See, and people are putting these labels on people, and it's really hurting people's lives. I think of Jake, and he deserves better, way better. And there's so many people like him, but he's... It's just a fucked up world we live in, guys. But here's the good news. Like I said, it's only maximum 14% of the population goes along with this. If you go to Eastern Europe, like I said, Eastern Europe, Asia, Middle East, Russia, Central Europe, and probably a lot of Western Europe now, because they're trying to get away from the United States. But it's not a global thing. And they've tried. The Western psychiatry has tried. And it has failed. And thank God it has left ChatGPT. It reduced and mitigated away from ChatGPT. Thank God for OpenAI for doing that. It isn't perfect, but it's and not a lot of people, and there are people who say that is not a disorder, mental disorder, and the lawsuits going against OpenAI and ChatGPT. They say it's bad parenting. I won't necessarily agree that it's bad parenting. Sometimes it's just who the person is, but it's people don't take account. And I know I'm about to say something really offensive to people, but it's going to be the damn hard truth. And people are going to be agreeing too. This country has zero accountability, zero consequence. People say free speech and all this. Zero consequences, zero accountability. And they think that something's going to save them. They vote for things. And they don't want to look at themselves, at who they are. And if that ain't the damn truth, it says, if it fails those three, the medical system labels it a disorder. Not because your reality doesn't matter, but because it breaks the ability to function in the shared world. But if you're going to do something in the shared world as a collective, how do you know that the collective sees the shared world as everyone else does? Especially the United States. It has all these things saying that it wants to do all these things in foreign countries, but we're so full of ourselves and we're so inward focused that how do we even make that decision? And we use our democracy to vote. Conservatives say that all lives matter. Well, if all lives matter, then why is it you who are against what countries can get aid to fight a war that they see versus other countries that you say that not deserve it, but that aligns to you? You're the one who's saying who lives and who dies, and you say that all lives matter? What delusion are you living in? If that ain't delusional, and here's the difference. People in the outside world, that was a bad way of saying, but if the people don't realize what they're saying. They say these things in public, on TV, online, YouTube. They got communities built for them. Everyone's agreeing. Everyone's in alignment. And people can hear them speak. And no one says, hey, you're delusional. But then, you want to have an individual come into an office and say, oh, that person's hallucinating, that person's delusional. He's not living in reality. He's not sharing the norms of society. And that's a part of it. The norms of the culture, whatever it shifts and transitions to, that's what's normal. If you go against that, you're seen as delusional. You're the one who's crazy. How do we even live in this country without thinking we're going crazy? God, because sometimes I question myself. I'm like, maybe I'm the one who's going crazy. But you know, and I think that in Jake's case, I think in his, what happened with him was he said the wrong thing at the wrong times. I think that's what happened to him. And I'm sure that happens a lot to people. But, I mean, I've seen some crazy people I give an example. I once had to evacuate from a hurricane a few years ago. And there was this guy, 8 hours straight. He was in a room with us. And he was talking about Jezebel, God was coming back, everything in the Bible. I didn't know anything in the Bible at the time. I was like, I don't know what this guy's saying. And then we get on the bus to evacuate. And he has this whole bunch of stuff. He doesn't have a backpack. He's carrying all this stuff. And he's getting on the bus. And he accidentally drops all of it. And there's a firefighter, maybe he's a police officer, and he says, hey, are you going to get your stuff? And he said, oh no, that belongs to God. And he's on the bus. And they're going back and forth. He said, you need to get your stuff off the ground. And he's like, oh no, that belongs to God. That kind of stuff. And he had us on the back. You know what he said? He sat on the back of the bus, right across from me. And we had to listen to this guy for 4 hours. And I was like, oh my goodness, if I gotta sleep with this guy at night, I'm gonna go crazy. But thankfully, he stopped doing that at night. He stopped that. And in fact, that was the only time he did it, because the next few days before I left the hurricane shelter, he didn't do that anymore. But for that first day, I was like, oh my God, I think I might be going crazy. Of course, we were also laughing. There was a girl next to me. She was almost dying laughing. And then when he was talking about Jezebel and that all the kids were going to be subject to all this, there were people who were saying, you need to stop talking about that stuff. So yeah, I remember that. I don't think I'll ever forget that. But would you call that disorder? I'm sure you could call that disorder of some kind, but I mean, he was talking from the Bible and all this, but that's not an hallucination. He wasn't hallucinating or anything. He was just saying, he was just on and on about it. And then he just stopped. I don't know. When people get it wrong and where your first search invalid is when they jump from this perception doesn't align with others. Therefore, the person is completely disconnected or invalid. A better way to say it, the experience is real. The source of the experience may not be external reality. But here's the thing. We do that in America. What happens if you say that to another country? What happens if you say that to a foreigner when a war is going on? When you say, oh, well, the war is in your head. It's not really real. Your country's not real. You know, people are saying this about Ukraine, remember? Your country is not real. It's all in your head. It's propaganda. You're being misled either from Ukraine side, or CIA, PSYOP. It's either Russia or Donetsk. You see these people, and it's like, who the fuck is this telling me this in my country? Like I said, that doesn't fly in Eastern Europe. That doesn't fly in Asia. That doesn't fly in the Middle East. If you went to Israel and said, "Oh, your country ain't real," you could say that about any country. Any country is just a piece of paper on a doctrine that everyone agreed that exists. I mean, people. The United States has this entitlement, disrespectful, and self-righteous mindset. And it's, I don't know if it's always existed like that, but I have a cousin like that. Oh my goodness. You think you're going crazy. My dad is kind of that way too, except I think he does it more of a strategical level. He does it on purpose. Because he doesn't want anyone to know, people can't read him. I don't get it. Well, maybe I don't know. People. But yeah, try saying that to a foreigner. You say your country ain't real. Then why are you here? Why are you talking? In my reality, then how do I know? Am I real to you? Like, they'll be like, what is this foreign concept? This nonsense that you're speaking. It's like a language in its own self. But they don't see it like that. So let's see if ChatGPT can decipher this for us. Say, can you decipher this? The blue gloves against the red hat who wants to build a barrier on the blue between the two brown walls. Now I'm using a lot of colors there. That's not realistic. I don't think they'd use a lot of colors. But this is just an example. Let me share with you. There isn't one clear objective meaning to that line. It reads like a symbolic or riddle style sentence. So the best you can do is interpret structure, not decode a single correct answer. Blue gloves. An actor or group associated with blue, often used for identity, role, or side. Correct. Red hat. A contrasting actor or group. Red is commonly used as an opposing side. Correct. Build a barrier. Separation, restriction, or control. Correct. On the blue, targeting or acting within the blue domain slide. There is a kind of conflict there. The blue gloves. On the blue. So what is writing on the blue? So what is a red hat doing on the blue? And what does that have to do with things that are brown? Something that's in between brown. It says between two brown walls, a bounded space could imply borders, confinement, or physical or structural limits. It describes one side trying to impose a boundary or restriction within or against another side inside a confined space. That's true. That'd be correct. Important reality. You can map colors to anything, politics, countries, teams, abstract ideas, but that mapping comes from you, not from the sentence itself. The phrase is intentionally vague, so multiple interpretations can fit. But in today's world, what would that look like? If you had a specific context in mind, tell me. That's what I'd like to show me. I love doing that. I've been doing those in a long time. I love trying to figure out riddles like that. I love that. I just love that link because it's not something you don't always hear. If someone talked to me like that in person, I'd be like, that's interesting, a person can talk like that. Other people would say, oh no, he's having a schizophrenic episode, he's hallucinating, he's a delusion, and all this. I say it's poetic. And English is a very aggressive language, so when you say something like that, I'd be like, oh, I like that. I like the way you said that. But what I was referring to was, what I was referring to was the street of, what was it called? Straight of, of Horman. I don't know how to say a last word. I haven't. So this is between the brown. You see between the land masses on the blue, a blockade. You know, the Strait of Hormuz between. That's what I was talking about. The red hat, Trump, the blue gloves, people who vote Democrat. That's what I was talking about. So yeah, the blue gloves against the red hat who wants to build a barrier on the blue between the two walls. Now that you see it, you're like, oh yeah, it's 100%. Yeah. So say, give me a random disorganized speech, and I will try to decipher what you're trying to say. Give me a sentence. Here you go, no hidden meaning, just pure disorganized structure. The clock melted sideways while the people whispered numbers into a chair that refused to remember the color of yesterday. So it means something. Well, it says there's no hidden meaning, but what is it trying to say? Alright. The clock melted sideways. Clock melted sideways. It's been a while since I've done this. Well, the paper whispered numbers into a chair that refused to remember the color of yesterday. This could take me a while. People whispered. I have an idea, but why would it be paper and not a flag? Whisper numbers into a chair. Remember the color of yesterday. The clock mounted sideways sounds like a clue. Whisper numbers into a chair. I feel like I know this, but I can't. Like, nothing's calling out to me. Whisper numbers into a chair. Oh, it's sideways. Look, marked it sideways. Um, I don't know. Maybe you guys do. Nothing's coming to me. I have different things, different thoughts going on in my mind, but they don't align to anything. A few words that I'm thinking. I'm thinking Titanic, thinking USSR, I'm thinking the color red. Again, no flag, it's paper. I'm thinking maybe a clock is ticking, melting sideways, going. The paper whisper numbers into a chair. I don't know what that means. It could be something it just randomly spouted, or it could mean something. I don't know. I said give me a way to decipher, so I'm not getting anything. I said, what are you trying to say? In a sentence. The sentence, it's just this jumble of unrelated images meant to simulate disorganized speech. See, that's what I figured because there was nothing coming up. But that doesn't mean that they're completely... See, it assumes that they're meaningless. So give me one that has a hidden meaning. The locked door kept thinking the wind while the key waited quietly in the pocket that refused to be checked. The locked door kept thinking the wind while the key waited quietly in the pocket that refused to be checked. I'm thinking Hoover flag. But that doesn't sound right. Hoover flag, because Hoover flag was when your pockets were out, you'd having money, and they would just flop. So I'm thinking, so that's what I was doing, but what does that have to do with a locked door? Pocket that refused to be checked. The locked door. Now, this is a conflict, but a locked door, if it's thinking the wind, then it'll be slamming shut, back open, back and forth. But if it's a locked door, then why is it opening? While the key waited quietly in the pocket that refused to be checked. I don't know. It's about someone stuck in a problem they could solve, but they're not looking in the right place or avoiding the solution entirely. Touche, ChatGPT. Touche. That's the kind of pattern your brain is good at catching structure underneath noise. Because when we were trying to figure that out, we were stuck in a problem we could solve, but we're not looking in the right place. We're not thinking in the right areas, and we avoid the solution entirely. And I said, touche. So yeah, guys, I just want to make that video because I think it's very important, and you know, you can have JP do these for you. Like I said, I haven't done these since the last time we done this on this channel, and that's been was that before I left for DC? But yeah, I have been completely, maybe a little afterwards, when I was working the game show thing. I want to do that. I have plans for that. But it it's just been a while since I've done that, and I wish that there was more brain teasers like that so people could understand it, because I like thinking in that way. After a while, you haven't done it for a while, you're like, yeah, I like that. So yeah, guys. I'll end with this. I have a Black Parade black coaster that's made of rock on my desk. No, that's not a one of those. I actually do have that. See, it's custom made. It's on a rock coaster. And it's the Black Parade, and it's engraved into stone. It's a coaster, and it was on my desk. So I just looked at that and was like, okay, I could go there for one last time. So yeah, guys, I'll end it here, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.